First off, I just want to give a quick statement before we begin today's video. The Tye-Dyed iguana today is just offering general husbandry advice. We're not offering or attempting to explain any sort of medical services or veterinary services. If you have any questions about your reptile-specific health needs, we're always here for answer any basic questions. But if you actually have medical issues, we definitely recommend contacting your local exotic reptile veterinarian. They say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Today, we'll find out in All About Reptile Wellness. So there's three main categories of items that I really think fall into the category of reptile wellness and illness prevention. The first category I would say is definitely the accident prevention category, and that's usually one category that's the easiest to deal with, I think. So that category really falls into things like overall cage design, things like that. So one of the main things we often see is like a broken tail or a broken limb on a lizard or things like that. For example, if they got their arm hung up on something in the cage, we'll often see something like that. Or for example, if you're a little bit careless and you leave your bearded dragon on the counter and you walk away from the room and then of course it falls, it could get an injury, things like that. This also plays into things like, for example, if you have like large rock shelf or really heavy decorations in your enclosure, you want to make sure those are super secure. A lot of animals, and I especially see this with burrowing animals and like things like uromastyx that like to dig down at night and things like that, they'll often undermine the substrate underneath the rocks, and that can cause cave-ins, and that can really cause injuries too. So this first category I would consider like the most preventable of all the issues, and it's just general wellness. Of course, we don't want our babies to be injured or anything like that, so just keep an eye on them. And then the other thing I would say too is, if you ever have a reptile at home, never leave it unsupervised if it's outside of its enclosure. All it takes is for a second for an accident, for a kid or another cat or a dog or something to make an accident. You know, the animals are generally unpredictable, so we just want to cover all of our bases. And why would we even allow them into that situation in the first place? The second category of overall animal wellness would be our husbandry. So this is going to be how we take care of the animals, what our parameters are of our enclosure. Do we understand all the specific temperature and humidity needs of this animal? One of the first things we think about when we typically talk about husbandry related issues is our enclosure, and that's going to be usually temperature and humidity. So for humidity, there's several issues that are usually related to humidity. The first issue is a lot of times we will see difficulty with shedding. That's one of the main issues people have with their pet reptile. Usually in most cases when I deal with a customer that has this issue, it's usually related to insufficient humidity, and of course the workaround for that is soaking the animal, modifying our existing enclosure humidity to better suit the reptile's specific needs. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, we run into more of the scale rot side of things. So the scale rot is typically when the reptiles get like a bacterial, like a rash or open sores type of thing. This is usually related to excessive levels of humidity. It's also really tied into stagnation and poor conditions in the enclosure as far as cleanliness. We can talk about that a little more. But if you're on the excessively high humid side, it can set you up for problems too. And we can talk about that a little bit more as far as like some of your other problems that you might run into. So the next category of common ailments we usually see in captive reptiles. So this is going to be kind of a broad category. This is going to be all of your illnesses, so like your viral, your bacterial, your fungal things. Most of these, in general, are related to poor husbandry habits. So we have overly dirty conditions in enclosure, things like that. We're not following proper cleaning protocol. That's a huge one with me. So especially like if you have multiple reptiles at home, you're definitely going to want to make sure between cages and between all of your different enclosures, you're definitely cleaning properly. One product that I do highly recommend as far as cleaning enclosures and general sterilization of, or not sterilization, but sanitizing of cage furniture and furnishings is our wipeout cleaner. This is a product that's made by ZoomEd. This is very useful for using on all the hard surfaces of the enclosure, wiping out your glass, things like that, especially when you're doing your comprehensive cleanings and things like that. One other tip I do recommend as well, with all of your water bowls and your water dishes and all your fixtures basically that your animal's either drinking out of, eating out of it, things like that. I do recommend doing a soak with those items too. Prior to cleaning, I usually recommend 1 cup of bleach per 1 gallon of water, and you soak those dishes for 30 minutes and then clean them with your normal soap and water afterwards. That's very useful in killing any sort of viruses or bacteria that may be accumulating. Some of the different things that reptiles can carry, salmonella, coccidia, they can actually carry different types of herpes virus and things like that. So it's very important by cleaning between enclosures and things like that, especially if you have a lot of reptiles. Sanitation and just being generally cleanliness between your enclosures is huge, especially with preventing any sort of diseases or virus or bacterial issues spreading through your collection. So that's a huge one for me. Getting still on that side of the whole bacterial viral issue, one of the other most common issues we see with captive pet reptiles is going to be respiratory issues. So upper respiratory infection, things like that. A lot of those are caused by insufficient temperatures, things like that. We usually see it mainly in the fall and the winter, and that's of course because temperatures in people's homes are lower. So this falls in again under that husbandry piece of, do I have the right temperature? Do I have the right humidity for the enclosure? So one other thing I really like to use as well, in all my enclosures, we recommend using laser thermometers. These are super accurate. The accuracy on these things is usually plus or minus a couple degrees, and these are going to actually give you your true surface temperature. Especially if you have multiple tanks, I definitely recommend these. They're going to be a little bit more than like an analog thermometer, but what you get for as far as accuracy is just so far and beyond compared to that analog, and you can actually know the true temperature, what your animal needs to be at. Which is super important because, all reptiles being ectothermic, they rely on their environment for their metabolism. So when that metabolism gets suppressed from insufficient temperatures, things can go downhill really quickly. And especially when we get talking back to the bacterial and viral stuff, if their immune system's compromised because you have insufficient temperatures in the enclosure, that's going to make things a lot worse for them. The next issue we would talk about as far as husbandry goes, this is just general animal information as far as husbandry. So the next issue I would see a lot, I would say, would be new acclimation type issues. So this could be a new animal to your collection or things like that. One of the most common issues, unfortunately, we see is like snake mites, for example, or reptile mites in general. My recommendation on this item is, if you have more than one reptile, if this is not your first reptile, I definitely recommend any animal you bring into your collection, we always recommend isolating them for at least 30 days in a quarantine. This is just to observe them, make sure they're eating healthy, just acting normal. Keep them in a separate room from your other animals if you do have multiple animals. And then one thing that our animal care team always does too, if there was ever an animal that was quarantined, we would always work with them last. And that is to prevent any sort of cross-contamination down the road. It's just a general good thing. If you have a new animal in your collection, always work on that animal last. Just because it may look outwardly fine on the outside, but you never know, it might have an illness or something later down the road, and that can protect your whole collection. As far as the mites as well, I generally recommend, if you do have multiple reptiles too, just keep your new snake or your new reptile observed and separate for at least the first 30 days just to check them out. Some people will even proactively treat their animal for mites in the beginning too. I don't think this is a major problem, but I don't really think you would need usually more than one treatment, especially if it's from a trusted seller or things like that. Another issue I want to talk about in relation to husbandry is actually internal parasites. So one thing that I hear from a lot of folks is that they want to source their animals' food from outside or things like that. This is definitely a big no-no, especially when it comes to live insects. Even if you live in an area or you live in the woods or whatever where you know that you think that something's not being sprayed, or there's nothing on the ground, you definitely don't want to do this. First off, you have no idea what that insect could have gotten into. Could have been under the crawl space in your neighbor's house where they sprayed pesticides. Could have got through some oil spill runoff in a field or something like that. You definitely don't want to do that. You definitely want to know wherever you're getting your feeders, they're super high quality feeders. They've been gut loaded properly. And also the other thing is wild feeders can carry different parasites like pinworms and things like that, which can cause a whole host of issues for any of your insectivorous reptiles.